Today I'm going to show you how to make this delicious 1 pound loaf of cinnamon raisin bread in the bread machine. Hello bread machine lovers, bakers, homemakers. Welcome to Butterfly Metals Homestead, where hearts are warmed and bodies are nourished. I'm Dorinda. So today we are going to be learning how to make a 1 pound loaf of raisin bread in the bread machine. In the description below, I will have the recipe for both the 1 pound loaf and the 2 pound loaf. So if you want to make a 2 pound loaf, you will have the recipe there and all the steps will be the same. But I'm also going to be using my little cute little Keepies bread machine, which does great with 1 pound loaves. You could also make this in a regular size bread machine. But since I'm making a 1 pound loaf, I like to use this Keepies because it has the upright bread pan, which works great for 1 pound loaves, because otherwise if you use the horizontal bread pan, your loaf is going to be a little short. So I like to use the Keepies when I'm making 1 pound loaves. It does really great. So first, let's go over the ingredients you're going to need to make this bread. You're going to want 1.5 cups of bread flour. You're going to want 2 1/4 teaspoons of yeast. You're going to want just a little over half a teaspoon of salt. You could even go up to a teaspoon. This is just a little more than a half a teaspoon of pink Himalayan salt. You want 1.5 tablespoons of oil. This is canola oil. You could also use butter or any fat that you want to use. I have 1/3 cup of raisins. You want to make sure your raisins are soft. If they're not, then you may want to soak them in a little warm water. I have 1 teaspoon of cinnamon. You can use less cinnamon if you don't like cinnamon or don't want it to have too much cinnamon in it. And I have here 2 tablespoons of white sugar, and I have 3 tablespoons of brown sugar. And here I have an enrichment. I am using applesauce. I have 2 tablespoons of applesauce. Now, I understand that in some countries, you cannot buy applesauce like you do in America. So if you don't have applesauce, you have other alternatives. Now, what an enrichment does, like this applesauce, when you're making bread, it makes the texture softer. It helps the bread to stay fresh longer. It just overall gives you a better loaf of bread. And the applesauce being moist just really helps in this raisin bread to give it a nice texture. If you don't have applesauce, you could use 2 tablespoons of any fruit puree that you wanted to use. So any fruit that you had cooked and that would go good with the flavor of the raisins and that you had mashed up thoroughly or pureed, you could use that. You can also use an egg yolk. You could also use 2 tablespoons of cooked mashed potatoes. You could also use 1 tablespoon of dry potato flakes. There are lots of different enrichments that you can use. You can even leave it out. If you don't have it, you can leave it out. You're still going to get a great loaf of bread. I just love the texture and what it does to the bread when I add it. I use enrichments in most of the breads that I make. You're also going to need some milk. You're going to need enough milk to make 2/3 of a cup of liquid. So if you're not using an enrichment, you'll need 2/3 of a cup of milk. If you are using an enrichment, you put your enrichment, whatever it is, whether it be the 2 tablespoons of applesauce or egg yolk. You can even use a whole egg if you don't want to waste the egg white. The price of eggs, I can understand nobody wanting to throw away that egg white. It's just when you put the whole egg in the bread, you're just going to get a little bit of a crispier crust. And if that's what you like, then go ahead, by all means, add the whole egg. It's just egg whites do make the crust of a bread crispier. But whatever you are using, if you are using an enrichment, put that in your measuring cup first, and then fill up to 2/3 with liquid. Now, I'm using whole milk. You could use other milks. If you want to make a dairy-free bread, you can use water or some dairy-free milk. You could use whatever you want for the liquid. You could even use, say, apple juice or water, apple juice, other kinds of juice. If you used something like grape juice, you might want to dilute it with water because it has a very strong flavor. But any mild tasting liquid you can use, and by all means, you can definitely just use water. So first of all, what we're going to do is we're going to add our applesauce, in this case, to our measuring cup. And then I am going to fill the cup to 2/3 full the rest of the way with milk. Now my milk is out of the refrigerator. It is cold, and the applesauce is cold. If you want to, you can warm this up in the microwave and bring it to about 104 degrees or so, but you don't have to. So to show you, and a lot of times I do in my videos, I will warm up my liquid, but I'm not going to, just to show you that it works just fine if you don't. Now, if you're using a quick cycle, which only has one rise, you definitely want to have a warmer liquid. But in this case, we do not have to warm our liquid. So we're just going to use the milk cold. So there we have our 2/3 of a cup of liquid. And to that, I am going to add my, now we can just go ahead, either way you want to do it. We're going to go ahead and put it in our pan. Now, the first thing you want to do is oil this little paddle. It is a pain when you can't get this paddle out. And what always works for me is I just take my paddle and dip it down in my oil, down on the hole of the paddle, dip it down in my oil, and then put it on the stem and make sure that I can move it in and out. If there is any kind of dried bread or dried dough on your paddle stem or up in this hole of the paddle, you are going to have a bear of a time getting that paddle out when you want to take it out. So always make sure that it's cleaned. I use one of those little brush straw cleaners that come, with the metal straws. They usually come with this little long, narrow brush to clean up in the hole of this paddle if ever I feel like there is something in there. And that really helps to keep the paddle from getting stuck. And this is a nonstick pan. Most bread pans have a nonstick, ceramic, or coated pan, so we don't have to butter it or oil it or anything. We're going to put our milk in, and also, our applesauce is in there. And whatever other enrichment or not that you are using would go in now. We're going to put in our oil, and that's 1.5 tablespoons of oil. And we have 2 tablespoons of sugar. We're putting that in. And we have 1/2 to 1 teaspoon of salt. This is a little over 1/2 of salt that's going in. And we have our yeast. We have 2 1/4 teaspoons of yeast, and we're going to go ahead and put that in. Now, don't worry about the fact that you're adding your yeast right now, and everybody says, wait, put it on top. If you're going to make this right away, you don't have to worry about it. Just go ahead and dump it in. If you are going to put it on reserve and set it to bake later, then you need to put your yeast on top of your flour. So here we have our 3 cup, here we have our 1.5 cups of bread flour, and I'm putting that in. We're going to save our brown sugar, our raisins, and our cinnamon until later. We're going to go ahead and put this in the Keepies bread machine. Turn it to make sure it's tight. Now, I'll tell you what, I would not skip this step if I was you. You can if you're in a hurry, but if you want a better loaf of bread, don't skip this step. Go down to the raw dough cycle, which is menu number 11 on the KBS machines and the Keepies machine. And you'll see that it's going to mix for 23 minutes, and go ahead and hit start. Now we are going to let this mix for a couple of minutes, and then we're going to make sure that it is not too dry or too wet after it has mixed for a couple of minutes. Now it's only been mixing for about a minute, But what I like to do is I like to scrape out the corners. I have found with this upright, especially the upright bread pan, it does have a little bit harder time getting the ingredients out of the corner. And if you leave those there, it's just going to end up on the corners of your bread when it's done. And it's definitely better just to go ahead and give it a little scrape with a rubber spatula and get it out. Now we want our dough to be fairly soft. And this one it's fairly soft, but I know that I've got to add raisins in a little while, and I want to make sure I have a bit of a softer dough. So I'm going to add about a tablespoon more of liquid. This can be water or milk, and I'm just going to add water. So I'm just going to add about a tablespoon of water. Whoa. I'm going to pause that because about the time I put my liquid in there, it started beating really fast and splattering the liquid out, and I don't want that mess. So I'm just going to push the dough ball around a little bit, get that liquid incorporated just a little bit, and then turn it back on. Okay. So now we're going to let that continue mixing. And I'll show you what it looks like when it's done. I'm going to let it go probably the entire time. If you're in a hurry and don't want to let it mix for 23 minutes, you can let it go 10, 15 minutes and then stop it. But I'm going to let it finish the 23 minutes. So I just wanted to show you 5 or 6 minutes in. And you know, when I added that tablespoon of water, it was really wet. But go ahead and look at that dough ball now. It is already shaped up. You don't want a really firm dough ball. So this one is looking really good because we want to be able to incorporate our raisins. And that's why you don't want your dough ball to be dry. You also don't want it to be sloppy wet. So the dough cycle has completed. We'll take a look at our dough ball. It looks really good. It's nice and soft, but yet it forms a good ball. You want it to be kind of sticky. That's what we're after. We're going to use the bread setting number 2 on the menu, which is a sweet bread. And we want to go to the 1 pound loaf. So on the loaf size, we want to select well, it says 1.5 pound on the keepies, but it's actually a 1 pound loaf. So we want to choose that first setting. And if you're using a different machine, just choose the smallest loaf size if it's a 1 pound or a 1.5 pound. And we want the color to be, I want it to be light. So I chose light. You can choose medium or dark if you would rather have a more crispy crust. But I'm also going to set the reservation. So what I want to do is I want to give this dough time to rest. Now this is flexible depending on how much time you have. If you have the time, you can go up to like 30 minutes to let this dough ball sit here and rest and kind of give it a little extra rise. If you don't have extra time, then you can just give it a 10-minute rest. But I am going to give mine a 30-minute rest. So I hit the button till I added a little over 30 minutes. And I am then going to hit start. And now, after it rests for 30 minutes, it will come on and it will go through the entire cycle. It is almost time to put our raisins into our bread mix, our bread dough. And I wanted to take a moment here to show you how to know when it is going to be time to put your fruit or nuts or whatever into your bread when you're making them. Now, this little machine does not have a fruit and nut dispenser. The larger KBS machine that I use most of the time does have a fruit and nut dispenser, but sometimes I don't use it because I just want to put them in myself. But an important thing to know is when to put them in, as well as when to take your paddle out of the bread machine. Now, your machine, if you bought it new, should have come with a working timetable. It should have come with a little booklet. The mine looks like this, and then my other machine came with one that was larger, but same book. Um, and if not, I will put a link to the KBS machine anyway in the description below, where you can go get a PDF of this working timetable. It is very helpful on multiple levels. But if you have your book, and I'm gonna split the screen and put a picture over here where you can see what I'm looking at here in this little booklet. So we chose menu option number 2, which was the sweetbread. And if you look down at the bottom, it says dispense fruit warning. It says warming, but anyway, I'm not sure what it's supposed to say, but dispense fruit. It'll start beeping. Now I have paused this machine because it was getting close to time to put them in, and I didn't want it to go off while I was talking. But it tells me here that on the sweetbread function, on the 1 pound loaf, that at 2 hours and 23 minutes left on the time that shows up here on your screen is when it's going to be time to put in the fruit. And then it says 2 hours and 28 minutes for the larger loaf. Now I have found some discrepancy there, so I'm not exactly sure. Okay, the pause went off. Let me pause that again. I'm not exactly sure if this is going to start beeping at 2:28 or 2:23. So I paused it way ahead of time so we can know. But that will give you a time. You could set yourself a timer, and or you can just keep an eye on the little clock and know that that's when you need to be ready to put your fruit and nuts into the machine. And also, we want to take our paddle out. Now, the total working time for the sweetbread function was 2 hours and 54 minutes. It tells us here on the chart. And it is going to bake when it starts to bake with the 1.5 pound setting that we chose. It's going to bake for 48 minutes, and it's going to ferment for 45 minutes. So that's an hour and 33 minutes. When there is an hour and 33 minutes left on this little timer here that shows up on the screen, that's when we want to take out the paddle. So after that final shape, which is going to happen around 1:33, let it do that final knockdown. Then we're going to take the paddle out and reshape our dough ball and continue on with the process. I just wanted to show you how to calculate when to take that paddle out. Just look at your total working time, come down and look how long is it going to bake, how long is that final ferment, add those two numbers together, and that's how much time you want left on the machine when you take your paddle out. But don't just go by that. Actually, come a minute or two earlier and make sure you see it do that final shape and knockdown, which only lasts for like 25 seconds. I'm going to turn the machine back on, and when it beeps, I'll tell you how much time is left here, and we'll put in our raisins and our cinnamon. But before I turn the machine back on, I want to show you what we're going to do with her. I'm going to go ahead and get our raisins ready. So I'm going to take our 1/3 cup of raisins here and put it in this bigger bowl. And I'm going to take my 3 tablespoons of brown sugar and put it in this bowl. And I am going to mix these together. And it just kind of helps the raisins, make sure my raisins are all broken up, not stuck together. Now I'm going to go in here with my hand because I can't do it with a spatula. But I'm also going to add my cinnamon to this mix. I'm just going to stir this around a little bit. Now I'm going to go in here with my hand and my fingers and make sure that all my raisins are little individual raisins and not big clumps of raisins. because I want them to mix into my bread really well. If you wanted actual cinnamon raisin bread swirl, so you wanted to see that little swirl design in your bread, what you would do when you take your paddle out right before that final ferment, you would take your dough ball out of the machine, spread it out into a nice little rectangle, spread your cinnamon and raisins over that rectangle, roll it up, shape it into a ball, and put it back into the machine. And then you would actually have a swirl in your raisin bread. I'm not going to go to all that trouble because I'm fine with just having everything mixed in and not necessarily having a swirl. So we have 2 hours and 28 minutes left, and the beeper just went off. I'm sorry, I missed the beeping. I didn't actually catch the beeping, but the beeping just went off telling us it's time to add our fruit or nuts. And so I am going to raise the lid. I'm actually going to pause the machine because I don't want things to go flying everywhere. And I'm going to put in my cinnamon, raisin, and sugar mixture. Then I'm going to turn it back on. And now it'll kind of look like it's not doing much at first, but as long as your dough ball is not too firm, which, I explained that earlier, make sure it's soft enough, then within a couple of minutes, it will have incorporated, and it's doing a good job. It will have incorporated those raisins, and I'll show you what it looks like once it gets done mixing. So the final knockdown, or what they call the shape, has just happened. It has got an hour and 33 minutes left. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little oil on my hands so that the bread dough doesn't stick to my hands. And I'm going to remove the paddle. So I got the paddle out. And now I just want to reshape my dough. I'm just going to take it out and shape it into a little ball and put it back. And that's all there is to removing the paddle. I'm just going to close the lid and let it finish. So whenever you get your bread out of the machine, you want to make sure that it is not stuck to the pan. And I always just give it a shake, and you can tell if it's loose. If it is not loose in the pan, just let it sit for a couple of minutes and it'll usually loosen up. But you don't want to leave it sitting in the pan for a long time because it'll sweat. There we have our beautiful 1 pound loaf of cinnamon raisin bread. Our bread is cooled, and now we can slice into it. Oh, just look how beautiful. Look at that beautiful crumb. It is so soft. It just looks so good. Just look at that. How beautiful. I'm going to get a close up here. Beautiful that crumb is. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe and share. God bless. Bye-bye.